Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. We see people joining, as is always the case in a webinar. There's the registration step and the login step and the, oh my God, I haven't updated Zoom in 6 months step and it'll no longer let me log in because our company believes in meat. So we're going to give it a minute or three, let people continue to join. We'll, once we see it sort of taper off, I'll kick off and we'll go from there. In the meantime, there's this lovely tradition that Alexei from our team has done, which is to welcome people that we recognize as they join. So, top of the list, I have to see and say, Alexei, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I hope that you're enjoying dinner. Brian, good to see you, mate. Claire, pleasure. Taylor, welcome. Glad to see you here. Todd, as well. We're going to give it a couple more minutes, let people join, and then we'll kick off here in just a moment. All right, cool. Well, in the interest of time, I'm going to get started, and I'm going to start with just some mechanics. But firstly, thank you and welcome. One of the bizarre parts of the pandemic has been the push towards online events when so many of us are just craving actual human interaction, but the benefit is the reach that it can provide. So I'm Tyler. I'm based here in Amsterdam, actually. I look after DevRel for ClickHouse. I'm super stoked about the content that we have today. Britt, hello from Seattle. I'm glad to have you here with us. Super excited about the content that we have here today. I think there are a few things that are better when you're an open source project than building and releasing a thing and hoping someone will use it and being delighted when they use it and then hoping someone cool is going to use it and being delighted by the story of their usage. And so today we're going to kick off with a chat by Jason Hines of Gigasheet. Jason, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to share with us. And I really look forward to hearing your story of ClickHouse in prod.
Yeah, no, happy to be here. And you will definitely hear the story. So that's what we have in store today. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Perfect. So if you don't mind, go ahead and kick off the share your screen and we'll let you start. In the interim, for those who are following along, you'll see a little Q&A button. Feel free to press that as you have questions and type them in. And then as we get towards the end of the presentation, I'll moderate those questions for Jason. So Jason, go ahead, take it away, mate.
Absolutely, sounds great. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gigasheet. We're a startup, very early stage startup. We've really got going around early 2021, so about a year now since we raised our seed funding. So quite early, but we've always built really since the prototype stage on ClickHouse. And I thought I would start off by just showing a quick demo, just show you what it is we do at Gigasheet, and then I'll get into it and explain the story behind it. So when you log into Gigasheet, this is what you see. It looks like a file list like you would have in Dropbox or Google Drive, and you can upload files here. The thing about Gigasheet, as the name would imply, is it's kind of like a spreadsheet, except for the fact that it can scale, maybe not forever, but certainly it has the scale and capabilities of ClickHouse behind it. So imagine if you had a Google Sheets built on ClickHouse. That's kind of what we're building. We're also building features and functions for data science, but not for data scientists, for more like business users, like sales and marketing people, cybersecurity people, people who are less familiar with how to code or even really how to write SQL or use a database. So when you first log in, you see this feature where you can drag and drop files or connect to your Google Drive and pull in files from somewhere else. And I will just pick this file and walk you through and just kind of show you what it does. And then we'll dive into, I have like 12 slides, but I won't kill you with it. I'll kind of tell the story of why would anyone build such a thing, right? This is a log file. This is a log, SSL log. So this would be traffic that has been transmitted over secure socket layer. And you can see here we have some IP address like the origin IP and the recipient IP, and then a bunch of ports and things like this. So it doesn't really matter what the file is, but you'll see why I'm talking about security stuff here in a bit. You can see also that this file has 2 million rows. Excel, for those who are familiar, really starts to crap out around 1.5 million. It has a hard limit, actually. So even if you have a powerful desktop, Google Sheets, even less. You'd have to set up a database and use something like Power BI or Tableau. That could probably do it. But if you don't know how to set up a database and you have a big file, a big log file like this, you're kind of screwed. So that's why we built Gigasheet, but more about that later. I'll show you how you can quickly explore this data. For example, you can do database-like things, but in a spreadsheet like format. So in this case, I just did a group by here, and you can see right away, I can tell you this origin IP address has the most events in this file. I could then expand that and see all the records within it and see, which responding host it talks to the most, and create subgroups. It makes whatever the data is, it makes it really quick and easy to explore. You can also see we're doing some aggregations here. So I could do unique counts. I can get back, percent empty, very basic stuff if you know how to use a database, and you can see how fast and quick it is. And really that's because of ClickHouse in the backend. So this is basically what Gigasheet is and what it does. Anyone can sign up and create a free account at gigasheet.com and play with it. So we launched it just last October, and I'll tell you kind of the story about how we got there and then a little bit about how we are using ClickHouse. So just to recap and summarize, what is it? Gigasheet is a SaaS big data analysis tool. It's hosted in the cloud. You log into it and you would use it just like you would anything else, whether it's Salesforce or Google Sheets. It looks and feels like a spreadsheet, but it really is a database on the back end, as we've discussed. And it scales to billions and billions of rows. Not surprising for those who use ClickHouse, but I think that's pretty shocking for people who are used to using spreadsheets. And that's primarily our user base. So how did we, why are we doing this? Well, I'll take you all the way back to the year 2017. I was at a cybersecurity company working there. We were in threat intelligence, and it became very successful. I've been there for about a decade before I left to start this. And we, none of us were wearing masks, unless you were going to like a Halloween party or costume party at that time. And oh yeah, the term fake news was coined in 2017. I looked up, what great accomplishments we had back then, and that's kind of one of the top ones. So pretty sad. But anyway, here we are. I'm working at this cybersecurity company, and we hired this analyst who was fantastic. She came out of actually a government intelligence agency, and she was one of the top analysts I've ever met in cybersecurity. She had written some blogs that got picked up by major news sources. And we were a startup tech company, and this was huge for us. We were like in the FT Financial Times, and I think the New York Times picked us up. And I was like, man, this is incredible. I know you're not just using our product to do this, you're doing some other stuff. How are you doing it? And what she walked me through was basically she had lots of log data, in this case, net flow, which is basically documenting traffic over the internet across networks. She had a big dump of this, and it was like 10 plus million rows. And she had broken it into 12 or 13 spreadsheets, I think. And she was doing very basic filters and functions on that stuff. And I was like, why are you doing this? This is crazy. Why are you doing this in Excel? And she said, I can't find any tools that will allow me to do this. I don't know how to use a database. And all of them, basically, I get to a point and have to load it into a database. I have no idea how to do that. She doesn't know how to write code. she can't do that. So I was like, that is insane. I will find you some tools that can do this. You worked in the government forever. Let me go do it. So I spent a bunch of nights and weekends looking for a better solution. And actually, she was right. Unless you are fairly technical and are familiar with databases and coding and that sort of thing, or can use command line tools, grep and awk, it can be a little intimidating. And so that I started kind of looking into this more, and I was looking for a good solution. And really the tools I found were that are powerful enough to do it, require extensive engineering support. And so I looked at, all kinds of different things, from BI tools to open source stuff. A lot of people, maybe not ClickHouse people, but a lot of people get to a GitHub page and that's like the dead end, right? And this is kind of what happened with her. She ended up doing this in Excel as a workaround. And after 3 months, our data science team in-house built a custom stack. It was, in this case, built upon Elk, but it could be anything. And it just got me thinking, what do you do if you don't have a data science team or a data engineering team? Those of us who work in tech, we sort of take this for granted, right? Like, all these people know how to use databases. But there are a lot of businesses out there where, no code is taking hold. There are a lot of people who aren't comfortable with this. And so with that, I actually started working on a tool. I built this tool. At the time, I thought, like, network data, network graphs would be really cool. And we'll use a graph database. So the first thing I built, with some engineers, was built actually on Neo4j and used a bunch of graph visualization. I was like, graphs are super cool. And I still believe that they are, but it turns out to not be a great solution for a lot of things. Because when you throw tons of data, like ClickHouse scale data at it, you end up with this. And the problem is not so much the graph database, but how you actually analyze it. And the graphs, the layout algorithms for visualizing graphs aren't, well, it's hard to, I won't say not good. There are a lot of them that are good, but it's hard to know which one to pick in which scenario. So it's really hard to get a good layout that allows you to make sense of your data. So I started talking to more people in cybersecurity, asking them how they solve this problem. And sometimes they use graph visualization, sometimes they don't. But it turns out they always have to triage first and cut the data down. And a lot of times they do split it up into many, many spreadsheets to try to do this. And so what you want to do first is kind of pare it down to what's relevant, and then you can push it to BI tools and data visualization tools. But even something like Tableau, you wouldn't want to graph like a bar chart of 80,000 bars. It's just kind of not useful. So you need to look at what's interesting and bucket it somehow. So I started thinking about that more. And while I spent a bunch of personal money and time and capital doing that, it was not a success, but I learned a ton. I learned a ton about what these kinds of users, at the time I was thinking cybersecurity users, need, because there are a lot of very technical, smart, analytical people, but their coding and database skills aren't, they're not those people. So they wanted to be able to analyze huge data sets without a data engineering or data science team. They do not know SQL or any query language or coding, and that is a barrier. There's some people, citizen data scientists, who are willing to learn and self-taught, but even if you're super familiar with Excel or SQL, you still end up looking up the syntax quite often when you're doing something complicated. I also found out that a lot of people, business people and cybersecurity people in general, a lot of their questions can be answered with various combinations of buckets, like groups and aggregations and counts. It's sort of like buckets and sub-buckets and the counts of that. A lot of business problems can be answered with that capability. And then, of course, they want to do some basic transformation, data manipulation, things that we know of as joins. In the Excel world, they call these VLOOKUP functions. And they want to enrich data, and that should be really easy. They don't know how to use APIs, but they know that this service can provide them more data. So started building this company and built a prototype. Full disclosure, first version was on Postgres. And I met a friend who had been using ClickHouse even before the documentation was in English. And he ran the documentation through Google Translate to run it. And he was like, you've got to try this database. And I was like, I don't know, man, like Postgres is widely supported, whatever. And he's like, just try it. And by just moving from Postgres to ClickHouse, I want to say we improved the speed by 9 or 10x. Like, it was pretty incredible. It sort of blew our mind. Like, we didn't change any code or anything. So we were like, all right, this is what we're building on. And it turns out to be really good for what we end up doing. We have thousands of users today and we've analyzed billions and billions of rows of data that they've uploaded to us. Our goal is to have a system that doesn't require any setup or database knowledge whatsoever. So our users don't know that this runs on ClickHouse, and that's okay. It shouldn't require any training. I kind of showed you how it works. If you can use Google Sheets, you should be able to figure this out, and it doesn't require any code or SQL. I didn't show you filters, but it works kind of like you would expect in Google Sheets or Excel. There's very familiar visual query builders, but the difference is just the sheer scale. And also it does translate down to ANSI SQL. So you can do much more complicated things than you can in a usual spreadsheet. So I'll talk a little bit about the ClickHouse magic that we love and what makes Gigasheet cool and powerful. Obviously it's great with tons of data. I think we've broken every single part of our infrastructure except for ClickHouse. Like, I don't even think it breaks a sweat. Like, it's just, for what we're doing, it just seems awesomely powerful. Super fast insertion. Actually, what happens behind the scenes is we've built a ton of logic to infer data file formats and delimiters and things like this. So really, where we've invested a ton of engineering time, instead of having to optimize the backend database, just out of the box, it's fantastic. What we spend a lot of time on is parsing the data. And so that an average business user who has a JSON file, like, they don't know what JSON is, they don't know what a schema is. We can take that file and infer how it should be flattened without asking any questions of the user. Same with various log and formats, whether it's like a packet capture file for cybersecurity or a Salesforce dump. It's super fast for insertion. We love that. Of course, awesome analytical reads. So when we present our spreadsheet user interface, it's super snappy and it feels very responsive. Some stuff that's kind of on the other side, like, that I think is we thought was a little weird about ClickHouse, but turns out to be perfect for our use case, is not great with lots of little transactions. One of the trade-offs we've made with Gigasheet is, unlike a regular spreadsheet, you can't just click in any cell at any point in time and like change the data. And we figure if you have billions of rows of data, you probably are never going to want to scroll and view every single row anyway. And you're probably not entering data. So we're not a data entry platform. It's just not what we do. We're all about analytics and more like data science light, if you want. So it's perfect for what we need. One thing, I don't know if this is unusual or not, but our users, like outside customers, are using ClickHouse as this back end. And my sense is that most people use this internally to analyze data from their network, their sensors, their whatever click traffic, that they have, user data. We are actually using this as servicing our customers. And I'm sure people do that in some ways, but our whole app is built on this. So I think that's kind of unique. And then, we have thousands of users who are doing this. So lots of people hitting this, and we have 50,000 tables on a single shard, actually. And we've just now started to introduce clusters. Like, everything was literally running on one database because the database didn't care. It was so strong and powerful, didn't really matter. We're doing it more for redundancy. We're just kind of paranoid that we might lose user data. So very impressive in terms of that. So the whole idea behind our stuff is if you can use a spreadsheet, you can derive insights from these massive data sets without code, data science, or really understanding anything about IT infrastructure. So that would allow, we actually have a number of data ops teams that use Gigasheet because they just dump the data and put it in Gigasheet and let the business teams, figure it out themselves. Don't come back to me with every single query that you want and slice of the data. We'll just load it into Gigasheet, several 100 million row dump, and you figure, product manager or salesperson, you can use this tool. So we think it's a fast way to triage huge data sets. So without doing a lot of pre-processing or parsing or loading it into something, and it doesn't require any training. So that's a little bit about us and kind of how Gigasheet came about and what we're out there doing. And like I said, data ops teams are even starting to use it, which I never thought they would because, they have more than enough skills to be able to do this with lots of other tools. But sometimes it's just easier to take a quick look at if the data is even interesting, before you invest time, energy, and effort and stuff. So in summation, we kind of think of it as Wix, the website platform. They made everyone into a web developer. Canva made everyone into a graphic designer. So now it's time to make everyone into a data scientist. And we're hiring, by the way. I'll clarify that slightly, right? So web developers, they don't fire up Wix in the morning and build applications, but everyone else does. Graphic designers still work in Photoshop and Illustrator. They don't go to Canva, but everyone else does. And I think data scientists, they will continue to use pandas and Python and R and ClickHouse and all kinds of tools. But what we're building, we think, is for everyone else. And so it's kind of like data science light, I like to call it when I talk to technical people. But yeah, so that's a little bit about Gigasheet, what we're doing, and why we're using ClickHouse.
Awesome, Jason. Thank you so much. I like that caveat at the end. The analogy that I always think of is my mother is a computer scientist. My father was, in his words, a petty bureaucrat who worked for the US federal government for 42 years. And he was interested in a website recently, and I sent him to Squarespace. He's like, now I'm a web designer. And I'm like, no, now web layout is accessible to you. And I think that that's an interesting way to think about that. There was a comment in chat that, in other words, all of the mere mortals with Excel skills. And I think that notion of bringing the power of data science, looking at billions of rows of data and deriving some insight to a broader audience without having to learn, data frames or R or even just native SQL, right? I think is actually a really compelling story to tell. And as I said, it's always fun to see the things that people build atop ClickHouse. So if you have any questions for David, drop them in chat. I was typing down notes and I put it up here. Oh, I think it's really interesting. You made a note about Gigasheet, and I said it in the singular this time, not in the plural, not being a data entry platform. How do you usually see the ingest of that data happen? Is that a sticking point for your users, or once they get it in, are they cool? Like, do they expect a certain way of ingesting that data?
They don't really, a lot of times they don't know even how to get started, right? Like one of the ways people commonly find us and get started with Gigasheet is a Google search, like, how do I open JSON in Excel? And unless you understand the schema, kind of the hierarchical nature of JSON, they don't know what JSON is. They just want to view it and see what's in the file. And so they usually just upload a file from their desktop when they get started. But then once you get into it, you start to create connections. So we can connect to SaaS platforms so that you could just pull your Google Analytics directly into, in the back end, ClickHouse. And on the front end, you see the spreadsheet-like interface. So I would say they start by just uploading a flat file. And then later, as they get into it, we can pull from FTP, S3, or directly from SaaS platforms as well.
Gotcha. One of the questions that came up in chat was actually related to that, and it was, has there been any thoughts about providing some sort of streaming access to allow people to stream data in?
Absolutely. So we're working right now on scheduling where you can do batches, but definitely in the future APIs, so that, you know, right now this is very much user, you know, business user oriented, where it's drag and drop a file in. But let's say you have a data team that wants to make this stuff accessible to you on a continuous basis, just streaming the data in. Yeah, and that's another reason why we chose ClickHouse, because when we're ready, we can flip that switch and it'll support it. And certainly that came up, you know, when we're out there as a startup raising money, like, where does it go from here? And that's another reason we really like the backend, the ClickHouse backend.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, mate. I think as someone who talks about ClickHouse all day, I sort of fundamentally talk about the work that other people do. I think those that get the power quickly because they're familiar with the tool set or because they can interact with it. For those that can't, something like a Gigasheet is really compelling to me because it's a very simple way of showing what can be built on top in a format that is comfortable to a broader audience. And I dig that a lot. One last question, and then we'll hand it off. Are there any visualization features that are part of the platform?
There are. So you can do basic graphs and charts built in, you know, pie charts, bar charts, things like that. There's a lot more we want to do with that. So there are two ways. One is just improving the visualization that's built in. Right now, it's very simple and very basic, but there are plenty of great visualization tools. So again, it comes back to APIs. What we'd love to do is be able to just make it easy to triage and push to Looker or, you know, whatever you want there. But yeah, if we're going to be improving it, there are some very basic data visualizations built in today. So for a lot of people, that's kind of, you know, they're just looking for the top 10 things in this huge data set. And for them, this will work.
Awesome. And for those of you who may be following along on a recording of this, gigasheet.com. Also, the Twitters are at Gigasheet, yeah?
Right, yeah.
Perfect. And yeah, go ahead.
Twitter. No, yeah, we're on the Twitters. If you want, you can follow our Instagram and some unruly Instagram posts there. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but it's fun. So check us out.
A company after my own heart. Jason, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it, mate.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Awesome. So we'll keep plowing on ahead because that's what you do in the wonderful world of having people speak. I'm a relatively new addition to ClickHouse in the order of number of months. And one of the reasons why you choose to join a company is based on who's working at the company. People who are incredibly skilled and also inspiring. And for me, one of those people is Geoff. And Geoff is going to share with us a bit of a story of ClickHouse from the past and ClickHouse in production. So with that said, Geoff, please take it away, mate.
Thanks, Tyler. Let me see if I can figure out the mechanics here. It's tough being an engineer and not being able to do basic video. All right, can everybody see that?
Indeed, it looks great.
And now I just screwed it up. Fun times. All right. I do not have quite as pretty as slides with little people on it. Tyler helped me with the slides, but I will not claim any visual talent. That's why I'm an engineer, not a data graphic designer. I married a graphic designer for that. So maybe next time I'll make her do the slides. So this is how I start. Why am I here? Who am I? I've been playing with computers a long time. That is not actually a picture of my computer, but it could be. That is, I think, a picture of my actual cassette player. some probably 1980. And I have been in love with computers ever since. I turned that into a career eventually, after a brief detour in law school and being a lawyer. I don't recommend that part. Being an engineer is a lot more fun. And the reason I'm an engineer, the reason I'm not a lawyer, is because I can make stuff with computers and it makes people happy. So that is kind of why I do this. And I've been doing it, like I said, a long time. I think that I turned out to be reasonably skilled at it. I tend to end up as the lead engineer for things because I like building stuff that makes people happy. It makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. I spent more than a decade in what we would call project-based consulting. That's where, you know, companies had their internal teams working on something and then realized, oh, I'm going to miss this deadline. Let's go hire a consultant. Or startups that said, oh, we have this great idea. We need some engineers. So I ended up with a very varied career. I have done everything from Adobe Flex websites to writing embedded C and a residential network gateway. So a lot of stuff. I'm really skeptical of people who come and say this latest great thing is going to fix all your problems. I don't know if anyone out there remembers SOAP or UML, things that did not actually solve my problems, did not make it easier to build cool stuff that people liked. So I come to every new technology very skeptical. And I felt like, you know, in my job for the last 20 plus years, I'm the guy responsible for getting stuff done. And I tried to pick technologies that weren't necessarily cool, but got stuff done. I think, you know, the reason I'm here is because ClickHouse was an amazing tool to get stuff done. And, you know, it's just kind of a story of how I ended up here. And as Tyler said, you know, one of the reasons you join a company is just the people there. One of the main reasons I joined is because when I looked at ClickHouse code, when I saw how Alexei and his team had done this, it's like, that is really awesome. I want to be part of that. I want to write code like that. I want to be involved in that. So I'm going to tell a little story about big data. I ended up as a consultant for Time Warner Cable for various reasons. I ended up, you know, being an FTE there, left my contracting job. I was originally the lead for a project that got canceled. So I got pulled off of that and say, we got this big data project that we need help on. We have these very expensive consultants who have spent 2+ years doing all this stuff, and we're going to fire them and hopefully get something working. So that was the first project I'd been on in quite some time where I wasn't the lead. I was like, just going to come in and help. Initially, I walked into a tech stack that included Scala and Kafka and Flume, Apache Flume, and Hadoop. And I was like, what is all this stuff? I had known none of that before. And the first thing that struck me about that project is it didn't make anybody happy. I wanted to go look at some data and somebody said, oh, to do that in Hadoop, you use Hive. So I fired up Hive, tried to find like one row of data, you know, so I could look at it to detect an error message or something like that, and kicked it off eventually. And it's like 10 minutes later, it kind of gave me the wrong answer. So that was my impression of big data. Is it's slow, it's complicated. I don't know if you've ever seen what it takes to write a Hadoop MapReduce query, but it's not easy. A lot of people love Scala and think it's the magic bullet. You know, they do Spark stuff. I learned Scala and thought, this is hard to read. This is not something that's very accessible. The one piece I really did like is Kafka, but the end result just wasn't working. Eventually, they tried to move away from Hadoop, in part because, yeah, it was slow. You know, Hive was so slow that, you know, the ops team that was supposedly relying on this stuff said, just do a Hive query and batch it and put it in MySQL so that we can actually do something with it. So that struck me as, big data is a lot of hype. You know, we paid those consultants millions of dollars, and this is just a big mess. And yeah, we did move it to Druid, and we started using Spark with, you know, some more Scala. People started using Parquet files, and it was all kind of just haphazard, and nothing ever really produced any data. There were a couple of teams that were like really dependent on our reports. The actual reports were based on television apps, and they would look at these reports and say, yep, Monday Night Football is really popular. So is the show Billions. And it's like, this is not anything exciting. This is not worth millions of dollars. So my career there ended somewhat ignominiously. But I was working as a Spring Boot developer at another company as a contractor, and I got a recruiter call from Comcast. And it's like, I don't work for Comcast. I already spent my time at a big cable company. Time Warner Cable was at that time the second biggest cable company in the country. And I talked with the owner, you know, the manager for the team that wanted to hire me, and I really liked him. Guy named Mark Tarlemecki, currently at Apple now. And he, you know, they interviewed me because I had big data on my resume, a bit inflated like everybody does. And you know, I had listed 2 million records per hour on our big data platform at Time Warner Cable. And Mark asked me, okay, you know, I'm on the CDN team. How would you handle 2 million records per second? And that number just blew me away. If you think about just, you know, the databases I, you know, started with, is like, yeah, I work for a small company. We've got, you know, orders and products, and maybe the whole thing has 50,000, 100,000 rows over a year. And now you want to handle 2 million records per second. So yeah, I didn't have a good answer for that. Somehow I got hired anyway. So you know, I walked in and it's like, okay, how are we going to do this? And the current effort, you know, when I was hired was, we're going to put it in Elk. We're going to put this thing in Elasticsearch. And the reason we were going to put it in Elk is because the finance folks at Comcast had said, you are spending millions and millions of dollars on Splunk. And finance folks are not happy. And the CDN team, Content Delivery Network team that I had been hired on, was using 80% of the Splunk license, 80% of those millions and millions of dollars. So the thought was, hey, Elastic is open source. Elastic will, you know, give us a free GUI and the Kibana, and it will be just like Splunk, because that's what everybody's doing, because Splunk is too expensive. So we actually spent about 5 or 6 months trying to make Elasticsearch work. We had some hardware that was originally intended for Splunk indexers. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with the Splunk, but you got to pay for the hardware, you got to pay for the license. So we bought some boxes, I think 20 or so boxes that we were going to use for new Splunk indexers, and then we got the the mandate is like, nope, stop using Splunk. So, okay, we'll put Elasticsearch on those indexers. And the biggest problem with those was Elasticsearch is really, really slow when you try to put data in it. And if you've ever dealt with Elasticsearch, you'll understand that's because of inverted indexes and keywords and source. And so that was a problem because I had this mandate of doing 2 million CDN records per second. And on a cluster of 10 Splunk indexers, trying to optimize Elasticsearch ingest, we could get up to 150,000 records per second. So we were only 10% or less of the way there. And I was not making anybody happy. I'd been there for 6 months. We'd reached the point where we could do 1/10 of what we needed, and we didn't have a way forward. But I got lucky, heard about ClickHouse, found the Cloudflare article that said, I think it was published in early 2018, March or so, said, hey, we could do 6 million records per second of DNS records. So I said, that sounds good. And it turned out, hey, it was really easy to install ClickHouse on those Splunk indexers. So I put it on a couple. I had one SRE helping me, and we set that cluster up over a weekend, and it was really straightforward. It was much simpler to install in Elastic. And we pointed our Kafka topic that was feeding Spark going into Elasticsearch. We just turned that and fired it at ClickHouse. And then we were in love, because that, 150,000, 200,000 records per second that we could get on 10 boxes, we got almost, we got more than that, 250,000, 300,000, 400,000 records per second on one box. So it was, we were done. I mean, it's like, this is awesome. And everything about ClickHouse made me feel warm and fuzzy. When I'd use Druid at Time Warner Cable, it's like, here, now you need to set up an overlord and cold nodes and calculate. And, there were like 6 different boxes you had to set up, and they all had to be coordinated. ClickHouse, I could set up one server. If I wanted another server, set up another server, create a distributed table, and now I had twice the space. I needed copies. I set up 2 more servers, 4 servers. I have twice the querying capacity. I have backups. I have automatic replication. And it was, this like very simple. I mean, I won't claim that now because I'm in support at ClickHouse. And it turns out there are a lot of nuances and a lot of complexities for setting it up. But compared to what I'd worked with before, ClickHouse was awesome. So I have been in love ever since. I mean, that was early 2019. And within a month, we were in production. We had, we were dumping, at that time, we started with some of our smaller CDNs. Comcast actually manages CDNs for a couple of other cable companies. So we were dumping 500,000 records per second into ClickHouse. People could look at it in Grafana. And within, a couple of months after that, we were doing that 2 million records per second. So, once we got those 2 million records per second, we found a lot of other reasons to like ClickHouse. And the first biggest one is it's really, really fast. And we could run queries on raw data. And if you wanted to know what happened with one IP trying to download video from our CDN, you could go to Grafana and you could get a list of every single HTTP request that IP made, and it would come back in, seconds. If you were used to doing that in Splunk, you waited minutes. If you miswrote your Splunk query, you waited hours. So seeing, real-time results was just blew people away, made people happy, made me happy. The other thing that ClickHouse does is real-time aggregations on insert. And, the original Elasticsearch architecture we planned was like, okay, we're going to put the raw data into Elasticsearch, and then we're going to feed it into a Druid cluster, and the Druid cluster will do the aggregations, and people have to go somewhere else to look at that. And ClickHouse just did it all. We could set up a materialized view. We could get sums. We could get sums per cache. We could get sums for what we call the delivery service. For example, NBC, we could see, this is how many events per second we're doing on NBC. This is how much lag time people are getting when they're watching their video. And we could do that by writing just a few more tables and a little bit more SQL. And then we could see the same thing in Grafana. So real-time aggregation made it also possible to do real-time alerting. And, you could set up a Splunk alert, but it would kill your Splunk servers and it would take time to fire. We could set up alerts on ClickHouse materialized views that could run, every 5 minutes, every minute. And those queries would come back in seconds, and we could fire alerts if things were bad for, 2 or 3 cycles of 5 minutes. So it just made my job a joy. And that's why I'm here. So, that project was incredibly successful at Comcast. It's still going strong. 2 million records per second. By the time we were done with the CDN data, it was 7 million records per second that we had to do. And as people in other parts of Comcast saw what we were doing, they said, hey, we want to get in on that. So the cloud DVR team wanted to get in on it. The team that did video transposing and all that fun stuff wanted to get on that. The team that did alerting and analytics on our clients, including set-top boxes and iPhone apps, or those things, all of that ended up in our ClickHouse clusters. So it made a lot of people happy. I just remember we had folks back in Philadelphia, the business folks, saying, wow, we can see what people are watching. We can see where we have problems in our video network. We can see stuff that's slow for video ingest. We can see places where our clients are having problems, and it was all real time, or it was all a year back, because we could aggregate things in a day at a time or a month at a time, and people who had no concept of what they were looking at could go look at our system, pull up Grafana, or hook directly in with a Go client and pull stuff into a spreadsheet. Not as cool as Gigasheets, but they could do the same thing. And it just made people happy, because when you're got in front of a computer, nothing makes you happier than getting the right answer in seconds. So then there's, going forward. I'm not at Comcast anymore. Those are good guys. I miss my team. But we'd reached kind of a plateau, and, there's only so many more teams you can say, look, ClickHouse is great. And there were some things that were not great. The biggest issue was, at the end, I had a team of maybe 10 people working for me on my team, and half of those were SREs, because we ended up with, a couple of hundred ClickHouse servers. We had to maintain Kafka. We had to maintain a Kubernetes cluster that did our ingest and did transforms and ETL. And it was all a lot of work, and it wasn't that interesting of work. It was not, it was good behind the scenes, but in a world that's moving to the cloud, it was suboptimal in some sense. We were supposed to pull data from AWS. We were supposed to pull data from another Kafka system. We were supposed to pull data from Google BigQuery. We were supposed to pull data from various HTTP APIs that were dumping stuff places. And all those things started moving toward the cloud. And ClickHouse itself was still, even though it's an operational joy compared to some things like Druid, it still requires a lot of care and feeding. And the cloud starts to offer some really compelling things. One of them is infinite storage effectively. Instead of having to, add more servers, scale up, start ingesting data into more shards in the cloud, when all this works right, we'll get to insert, you don't care about it. You just keep inserting data. We add, block storage on the back end, object storage on the back end, and your data is infinite. It's also automatically copied. You don't have to worry about your replicas. You don't have to worry about your shards. And there's a whole level of administration and monitoring and all the things that go with ops that, are necessary for a large installation like that. But you don't want that to be your core business. You're not interested in that. You're interested in your fast queries. You're interested in, working with your data. I mean, the same thing with Gigasheet. I mean, it's like you want your users to have access. You don't want to be worrying about the back end. So that's why I'm here. And I think that's all I got.
That's awesome, Geoff. Thanks. That's it. That's the future. The cloud. Buy you a cloud. It's interesting the statement you made there at the end about the balance between using it and running it. I think is interesting because I do think it's not an analogy I'd considered with what Jason and team are up to at Gigasheet, but it is analogous. Interacting with the data is much more interesting a problem domain than managing the systems that allow you to interact with the data. Now, it's sort of a necessity in the work that many of us do, but it's very interesting for me to see that similarity across two sort of very different kinds of companies in, Comcast, TWC, and in Gigasheet. And that's I've seen both sets of slides, to be clear, right? But it wasn't the thing that was impressed upon me until just now. And I find that really intriguing. I think there's a story to tell there at some point.
Yeah, I the last year of my career was mostly around securing all the things. And I don't like worrying about, generating TLS certificates. I don't want to try to integrate with SSO and, Azure Active Directory. I mean, those things are not fun. And to have somebody else do those is really appealing.
Absolutely. I also find it just absolutely hilarious that having spent a career in data persistence of a variety of flavors, including early in the NoSQL era when big data first became a buzzword, the notion that the results of the lengthy analysis was that Monday Night Football is indeed popular. I find that incredibly humorous.
Yeah, that was my, in the business, we call it, management by airplane magazine, right? Where it's like, this is the latest thing. Everybody needs to have big data, and you got to pay, these expensive consulting companies to set it up for you. And that was the result.
Indeed. Pardon me. There's actually, it's on the other side of the canal. I live near a canal now, so it's on the other side of the canal, but there's actually a fire across the street. So my coughing is just smoke inhalation. So I apologize in advance. Fortunately, again, safe on the other side of a body of water. Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you both so very much. Jason, Gigasheet, gigasheet.com. the Twitters, the sometimes unruly Instagram, and if you're interested, check it out. Gigasheet is hiring. All those things accurate? Awesome.
Yep.
I see. Perfect. Perfect. And speaking on behalf of ClickHouse for a second, we're hiring too.
We all are.
Right? Everyone is hiring. But more than anything, my encouragement to you, the best thing that we can do in learning from the stories of others is to play. Download a ClickHouse, use it in an unexpected way, be that building a Excel style Google Sheet-y looking UI on top of it, or as Alexi did with Pastilla.nl, which you can read about on the blog, a paste bin effectively directly atop ClickHouse. Play with it, break it, try things, and then let us know what works and what's horrible. And together we can make it more compelling. The world is reopening, and that's exciting to me. But what that means is we're going to host more of these. And at some point, we're going to host some of them in person. So if you're watching the recording or if you're here live, which if you are, thank you. It's good to see you. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to speak at a meetup. If you'd like us to come speak at one of yours, if you would like to host, I am easily found online, or I'm just Tyler at clickhouse.com. We'll take the recordings of these, chunk them up into lovely little chunks, get them online, make them available for everyone, and continue to promote. But Jason, Geoff, thank you immensely for your time today. And for those of you who are still here, we appreciate it, and we will see you all very soon. Be safe.